This is the sweetest pure love anime of July. The girl was the envy of everyone's rich family, but due to her mother's death due to illness, she grew up being abused by her stepmother and sister, and was even dumped as trash to the feared general. But just when the family is waiting to see her laugh, she gets a truly happy engagement. It turns out that just the night before, the aloof and unassuming main character had suddenly asked Miyo out on a date. But before Miyo can react, the male lead has already left the room. The next day comes. For the date, Miyo wakes up earlier than ever, but since there's no mirror to use, the only way she can dress up is to comb her hair. Looking at the wooden comb that was trampled by her stepmother, Miyo is reminded of her mother again. Just then, however, her mother-in-law suddenly approaches her. She is especially worried about Miyo's formal personality, so she comes to tell Miyo that she can use the mirror in her room as she pleases. But when Miyo sees herself in the mirror, the vicissitudes of her face make her feel more and more inferior. However, her mother-in-law had already guessed that Miyo would be lost because of this, so she specially brought along the makeup box that she had used when she was young. Though it wasn't a fashionable item, Miyo, who had never touched such things before, was very happy. It was only then that Miyo realized that makeup was not as extravagant as she thought. Looking at herself in the mirror, Miyo was both shy and overwhelmed, and at the same time, happy and overwhelmed. However, on the way to the town, Miyo's heart is full of anticipation, but the hero takes her to his workplace. Looking at the luxurious gate in front of her, Miyo's inferiority complex gradually came out again. It turns out that the reason why the male lead brought her here was just to find a place to park. But just then, the male lead subordinate, Budo, happens to bump into the two. Takashi noticed Miyo next to him at first glance, and enthusiastically went up to ask Miyo about her identity. After all, it was a rare thing for a minister to bring someone out to play. After getting rid of the disruptive minister, the male lead takes Miyo to the busiest part of the city and asks if there's anything Miyo likes that she wants to buy. But Miyo refused without hesitation, because in her eyes, her humble self is not worthy of this place at all. But just then, the hero suddenly thought of a good place. Looking at the streets with people coming and going, a smile gradually appeared on Miyo's face. But when she came back to her senses, she realized that the male lead had been staring at her for a long time. But before the male lead could say anything, Miyo started apologizing again out of habit. Instead, the male lead gently stroked Miyo's head and told her that no one would blame her. He was the one who wanted to bring Miyo out to play, as long as Miyo watched the road carefully and didn't get lost. Miyo was then taken by the male lead to the best ready-to-wear store in the area, and the owner's wife was captivated by Miyo's unique aura just by looking at her. As it turns out, the male lead didn't come here to buy something for himself today, but rather, he made an appointment with the boss's wife to customize new clothes for Miyo. This is because a few days ago, when Miyo was mending her old clothes, she happened to be accidentally seen by her mother-in-law who was passing by. So the mother-in-law told this to the male owner, and it was then that he realized that the only clothes Miyo could wear out of the house was the one she was wearing. While the hero was in a daze, the boss's wife had already chosen the right color for Miyo. However, at that moment, the hero's eyes were suddenly drawn to the pink fabric next to him. And just by looking at the pink fabric, his eyes instantly floated before his eyes, how Miyo would look wearing it. So, when he came back to his senses, he immediately asked the boss's wife to make a few more dresses for Miyo out of the pink fabric. The boss's wife then took out another box. This was also what the male owner had quietly asked her to prepare. It turned out that the most important thing today, besides helping Miyo make customized clothes, was to come and get what was in the box. They then went to the dessert store. Since she's never had anything like this before, Miyo sneaks a look at the male lead with every bite. Here, the male lead tells Miyo that the two are going to get married in the future, so that Miyo doesn't have to be afraid of herself. Hearing the word marriage, Miyo froze a bit and didn't react for a long time. The time soon came to evening. Just when Miyo was taking a bath, the male lead quietly placed the box in front of her door, and Miyo soon discovered the delicate box. She carefully opened the box and found an incredibly delicate wooden comb. Miyo couldn't believe in her wildest dreams that this was real. She panicked and came to the male lead's room. However, the male lead seemed to have guessed that Miyo would come over. He told Miyo not to worry and told her that it was just an ordinary comb. However, this is not the case. It turns out that just now, when he was stealing and putting the comb away, he happened to be seen by his mother-in-law who was getting ready to go home. It turns out that the gift of the comb also meant a marriage proposal, and she thought the hero was proposing to Miyo. After hearing the hero's explanation that he didn't mean anything more than just giving a comb, the mother-in-law didn't care. She told the hero to treat Miyo well in the future. After all, Miyo is a rare and good girl. Since receiving the engagement gift from the hero, Miyo's face was no longer dejected. She quietly finds her mother-in-law and tells her that she wants her gift back. Naturally, her mother-in-law is delighted, and she immediately drops her chores and keeps looking for something on the bookshelf. It turned out that her mother-in-law knew that Miyo didn't have much money, so she specifically looked for a craft magazine. Because as long as the gift is made by Miyo's hands, no matter what it is, the male lead will be especially happy. Miyo, after seeing the wide array of small gifts in the magazine, quickly gathered her eyes on a beautiful headband. She went over and asked the male lead if he liked it. The man replied that he liked it. So Miyo rushed to take a special day off before the male lead went out on an errand. Because she was still a bit uneasy, the male lead wanted to accompany her on the street himself in a few days. However, knowing that his mother-in-law would accompany Miyo, he gave a few reassuring words of advice and headed out. On his way out, the male lead gave Miyo the amulet, which he had made with his own hands, and instructed her to keep it with her at all times. So, accompanied by their mother-in-law, they went to the largest fabric store in the area. Although there was a wide array of goods here, Miyo found, at a glance, the color that best complemented the hero. At this moment, her mind was still filled with the hero's silver hair. As she watched her cheeks blush, her mother-in-law smiled with satisfaction. However, on the way back, her mother-in-law suddenly remembered that she had forgotten to buy something, so she asked her to wait for her back at the same place. As a result, Miyo had just watched her mother-in-law leave when she suddenly heard a piercing sound. It turns out that her sister has also arrived. And on the other side, the male lead has arrived at Miyo's mother's house. In order not to waste time with these two assholes, he directly stated the purpose of his trip. It turns out that the male lead has already decided to marry Miyo as his wife, so the male lead wants them to apologize to Miyo for the mistake they made. He agrees to pay them the gift money as usual, but the only condition is that they sincerely apologize to Miyo. Otherwise, the male lead will have to cut all ties with them completely. On the other hand, the sister is still taunting Miyo. Just as she was getting more and more out of line, the mother-in-law finally came back. But even though the mother-in-law has returned to Miyo, the arrogant sister continues to say harsh and unpleasant things. However, the mother-in-law is after all the steward of a military family. She still acted calmly and freely in the face of her impolite sister. Not only did she reveal her identity, but she also made it clear that Miyo was about to become the wife of the Kudo family. After easily resolving her sister, the mother-in-law takes Miyo and prepares to go home. On the male lead side, he showed an equally strong aura. He gave the two bastards a few days to think about how exactly they should apologize to Miyo. But just as he was leaving, he happened to bump into his sister who was returning. However, Miyo at home looks like a different person. Not only does her mouth keep saying sorry, but she once again changes back to the low self-esteem person she was. She doesn't even show any joy when the hero returns. But the male lead seemed to have sensed something. He then quietly questioned his mother-in-law late at night. Only then did the mother-in-law tell the male lead that Miyo's face became very pained every time she saw her sister. When she came home, she kept cleaning the house like a servant and until now locked herself in a dimly lit room. After learning everything that happened during the day, the hero did not try to blame his mother-in-law. He came alone to Miyo's door, but Miyo, who was hiding inside the house, never responded to the hero's comforting words. At this point, the mother-in-law told the hero that only when a woman feels sincere love will she become brave and stop feeling inferior. She encourages the hero to tell Miyo all about his feelings for her, so that she can rest assured. On the other hand, Miyo is in deep thought as she looks at the finished hairband in her hands. She didn't know whether she should give out the hairband or not, and she didn't know how to give it to the male lead. But just then, the voice of her mother-in-law suddenly came from outside the house. It turns out that the mother-in-law has brought a guest, and she is the very person Miyo misses the most. Because Hana is the only person who has ever loved Miyo. Miyo even thinks of her as a motherly presence. Hana tells Miyo that she has moved back to her hometown since she was kicked out by her stepmother. Although her life is still meager, she lives a particularly happy life. With Hana's attentive companionship, Miyo finally tells all about what's on her mind. She has been suffering from low self-esteem for not being able to see the ghost, not to mention not knowing how to face the male lead. Hearing this, Hana didn't choose to comfort Miyo directly, but took out an envelope from her bosom. It turns out that the only reason they were able to meet again was all because of the male lead's silent efforts behind the scenes. Upon seeing this letter in her hand, which had not even dried the ink, Miyo realized that the male lead had already known about her birth. Encouraged by Hana, Miyo not only brings a handmade gift to the male lead's room, but also confesses to him everything she's been hiding. However, while talking, Miyo gradually knelt down in order to give thanks. She puts the gift in front of her and tells the male lead to do with it as he pleases. But looking at the woman who is so humble in front of him, the male lead not only doesn't get angry, but slowly comes to her side. The hero asks Miyo to stay and consummate the engagement with himself. He wants to be with Miyo all the time. In this moment, the two embrace happily.